Are you a woman in the corporate world striving to break barriers, challenge unconscious bias, and lead the way for women in leadership roles globally? If so, this is the podcast for you. Introducing Leading Ladies Who Lunch. The lunch hour is usually the time when colleagues get together for real, honest conversations about work, life, and everything in between. In each episode of Leading Ladies Who Lunch, we'll delve into insightful discussions and share actionable strategies to help you navigate corporate life. Co-hosted by me, Cece George, a leadership development architect and inspirational speaker. I'm thrilled to share my experience and expertise on leadership, mentorship, and organizational intelligence to help you own your career.
And me, Rachel Lowndes, CEO and founder, imposter syndrome expert, and mindset coach at Rachel Lowndes Coaching and Consulting. Passionate about helping women conquer imposter syndrome and unleash their inner confidence to get the recognition and promotions they deserve.
Jam-packed with insightful conversations, expert advice, and inspiring stories from a diverse group, we'll explore how to overcome obstacles, shatter those glass ceilings, and build unshakable mindsets to unlock your true potential. So whether you're sipping a coffee or enjoying a meal at your desk, tune in for a no-host bar lunchtime chat. Episodes will be dropped every 2 weeks. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button.
Leading Ladies Who Lunch, empowering women, one conversation at a time. Welcome back to the Leading Ladies Who Lunch podcast. Hey, Cece, what's happening with you? How are you?
Hello, beautiful. Always so good to catch up with you. All right, things have been great, moving super quickly these days, especially with work, but I love being busy. I am not one to sit idle. So again, work has been the bulk of that busyness in a really good way. And I'm actually involved in a ton of new leadership development initiatives. So no complaints there, because that is my passion. But what about you? What's going on?
Oh, well, I mean, I'm glad to hear you're busy and you've got a lot of new initiatives going on. I know that that is your passion, as you say, and it's something that's your jam. I'm always busy. I mean, I'm always creating new stuff and getting out there and meeting people. So for me, that's my passion. I just love connecting with new people and making an impact on their lives. So,
Oh,
always staying busy. So, Cece, it's that time of year again. It's International Women's Day week. And look, whilst I love the idea that we have a day, a week, a month to celebrate women, why not? We're fabulous.
sure.
But I do find that this concept is somewhat, and I'm going to get a little bit controversial here, right? But I do find it a little bit boring and tokenistic. Okay. Now, before everybody has a heart attack, I say this, and I can hear the collective gasp there. I only say this because it does feel like that year on year, despite all our efforts, we are still talking about the same dang thing with nothing actually changing, right? So I'm talking about the conversation being a little bit boring because of the lack of change, not the actual day, just to be clear.
Right, right. I mean, so again, at first I was like, damn, tokenistic, really? But I do understand what you're saying, and there's a reason why we have an International Women's Day, Women's History Month, etc. And you don't say Man's History Month or Day because
Mhm.
every day just feels like that, right? Year after year, we still feel the need to highlight our accomplishments because we're still coming in second. Not in
Mm.
every area, but it still feels like we are coming in second. And
Mm.
growing up, advocating for women and highlighting my achievements was not something I was ever used to in my Indian immigrant household,
Yeah.
where men are revered and women were historically treated as, well, to be nice, not as good. Okay.
Right.
Back in the day, if you had two daughters, it was looked at as, oh, if only you had a son,
Mm.
carry on the family name. In my family, I always felt my brother was the golden child, not only because he was the oldest in the family, but he was a male heir. And of course, him graduating from Harvard Medical School, well, there was nothing I could ever do to top that. So no matter what my accomplishments were, it was never more stellar than that. So
I
I
mean,
think right, I think IWD or International Women's Day is just another opportunity for us to celebrate our women's achievements collectively to empower women, young or older, not old, but just older, and also just acknowledge the challenges that we've had historically in various areas.
Hmm.
And, I did a little digging on this, and it turns out from what I found that the United Nations actually began celebrating IWD in 1975, which I didn't know. And they
Yeah.
officially marked, right? They officially marked March 8th as the UN Day for Women's Rights and World Peace in 1977.
Right.
So it's about 50 years-ish old. And interestingly, I didn't know this also, but the UN adopts a theme each year to
Mhm.
highlight a specific issue. So I thought that was really
Yeah.
little, fun fact there. And I know what you mean by, it's getting a little boring because we haven't moved the needle so much, or it's
Yeah.
perceived that way. And I say that because unless we talk about and highlight our accomplishments, this day is needed for that reason. But we also need to also talk about the challenges so we can make changes in those areas and on a global stage, right? The next generation of women everywhere have to hear about it so they can see themselves as part of the solution and part of that global stage advocating for all this. So I do agree with you that the day is needed, and I would argue that we just need more of it, more attention to it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think one day is kind of a little bit, that's what I mean, tokenistic, like one day, that's the point I'm making. Like it should be that we're always celebrating women, and I don't want to create any confusion there. I mean, I think the point is like, why do we have to have a day to celebrate women? We should be doing this every day, right? And as you say, we don't have a International Man's Day because men are being celebrated every day. We live in a patriarchal system. So can we not just have more equality in the system where we are just celebrating women? But obviously it is still needed, so we do have to talk about it. But
Sure.
the thing that really does irritate me most about it is that it is always about gender equality, the pay gap, intersectionality, lack of representation of women in leadership, etc. And it's great. We're aware of this stuff, but without change, what is the point, right? It's
Right.
simply not changing fast enough. It's just the same conversation year on year. And I get that we do have to have the same conversation because it isn't moving fast enough. I do understand that. But I suppose I'm just kind of getting a little bit tired of the whole companies putting on morning teas with freaking cupcakes, right? And no actual action being taken, right? That's the tokenistic part of it because it becomes
Right.
a box ticking exercise by leadership and
Mhm.
HR. And that annoys the crap out of me, right? And don't get me started. I mean, I don't know if this still happens a lot, but I did go to a couple of events a few years ago, and the narrative was still around man hating, or like that's kind of the way it was coming across. And I really was like, no, I don't want to be part of that. I'm not part of a man hating. That's not what equality is about, right? So I don't want to be involved in any International Women's Day events that have an undertone of man hating in it. That's not why we put these events on. That's not the purpose, right? So I'm really kind of very clear about that. We don't need to be about man hating. Definitely not.
Agree. Totally agree with you there. I think that's why we need strong women and women of color, especially in leadership roles, to steer that ship to make the kind of progress that you and
Mm,
I and others know that we need. And
mm,
yes, to your point about the man hating, it's not about that, but it's about how we leverage a woman's unique perspective, logic, and expertise to drive change. And to do that, we need women in those positions. So, it goes beyond the man hating, events. It goes beyond the morning tea and the cupcakes and the IWD themed hashtags and banners on social media all over your company's internet. It's far more above that because those are all just things to check off the box that yes, we did that for that one day. It's
mm.
about the education and raising awareness about women's equality and gender parity related issues. And even things like domestic violence, which has been on the rise, especially since, the COVID pandemic, while also still celebrating all the amazing things that we're doing and we continue to pursue in various spaces.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm not arguing any of those points at all. I'm just debating why we keep talking about the same thing and there's no real change. And like to your point, like just putting out a post on LinkedIn saying your company's having a morning tea or whatever, or oh, we're gonna put a post up about how we're talking about International Women's Day, but the rest of the time we do nothing. That's the
Right.
point about the tokenism that irritates me, right? Because
Mhm.
that is tokenism, putting
Right.
out a post and saying we look at us, we're talking about International Women's Day, but like the rest of the time we just ignore it.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
like
The
that is
flavor of the
token,
day.
that's the definition of tokenism, right? So I was actually surprised this year to read that the theme for International Women's Day 2025 is accelerate action. Right? And that's why I couldn't agree more, because that's kind of what I'm saying. So, but I think, we need to talk about what this actually looks like and means in practical terms.
Right. And I love that they intentionally use the word accelerate because
Mm.
it suggests this immediate need for change, which obviously there is, right?
Yeah, yeah. So on the International Women's Day website, there are 7 key points under that accelerate action theme that
Mhm.
they've highlighted as to why this theme resonates so well, right? So they are: 1, progress is too slow. Yep. 2, addressing global setbacks, things like COVID, heightened domestic violence as a result of COVID, the COVID pandemic, and other global
Right.
setbacks. 3, inspiring momentum for change.
Mhm.
4, tackling structural inequalities. Yep, yep, yep. 5, focus on impactful solutions. 6, inclusivity and intersectionality. And 7, a timely call for accountability. Now,
Mhm.
look, when I read that list, that it didn't really inspire me at first. My first reaction was boring. Heard it all before. What's new? But then, I can be a little bit dramatic at times.
No, you agree with you. We've heard it before. We've heard it, I feel like, for decades. This list is not revolutionary. It's all the things that we've always known, right?
Mhm.
um you know Progress has been slow. We've heard that for so much, so many years now, and I feel like I've always heard that for as long as I've been alive. So
Mhm.
that, and also addressing setbacks like the COVID pandemic and the heightened domestic violence. I would hardly call it heightened domestic violence a setback. Rather, it is a crisis, in my
Yeah.
opinion. And it
Mm.
amazes me how much violence against women still happens today, despite all of our progress and advocacy and all the nonprofit groups who rally against this and rally for women to provide more support, for, domestic violence victims. Again, this is why we need to highlight International Women's Day. The rest
Mm.
of that list is perhaps a bit lackluster because I've heard it just all before, just like you have. So
Yeah, and
no.
I mean, we don't want to be like dismissing them, because they are valid points, but it is like, we've heard it. Why are we not doing anything about it? I know that they are important points,
Right.
but I think the point, we are being a little bit controversial here, but for a purpose, right? Because we want to like call it out, right, and just say, let's just stop talking about it and let's make it happen. Why are we still having these conversations? And of course we're having them because nothing is happening, right? Or it is slow to move, and we know it's moving, but it's not moving fast enough, right? But I did have a little think about those 7 and how I felt about them, and I felt that of them, the ones that kind of really stood out to me as pertinent to discuss was progress is too slow,
Mhm.
structural inequalities, and accountability. And I thought they were really important for us to kind of break down in today's episode from a career and corporate point of view. So would you agree, Cece? Those are kind of interesting.
Oh, yes, for this audience and for our show today and our listeners, I agree wholeheartedly. It's something that we need to drive into. So let's
All
go
right.
for it.
Okay, cool. All right. So let's start with progress is slow.
Okay.
Now, on the International Women's page day, I just had a little moment there. I was like, what is the D?
What is that?
On the International Women's Day page, they go on to explain this as moving beyond symbolic gestures and towards bolder action. Amen, sister. Ditch the freaking cupcakes, right? What do they do? Nothing. I mean, tasty, but sure.
That's it.
So yeah, exactly. Progress is too slow in many areas. We've been talking about all of this for too long. Now, in
Right.
2024, the gender pay gap in Australia was reduced and reported at being at its lowest on record in August at 15%. And
Wow.
in the UK, it was 7% as of April, and in the US, 16%. So it is improving, but there's still a gap, right? And I know that there are many factors to consider around this and that contribute. So this is a bigger debate, but 15, 16, even 7% is still a gap too big, right? And there are more women in the workplace now, more educated women, more women with similar, if not better, experience. Yet there is still a pay gap, which means we have room for improvement, not only in how we I can never say this word, remunerate women. So many people say it wrong. Some people spell it wrong too, right? So not only how we remunerate women, but also educating women on how to ask for what they're worth in the market, right? This is super important. Now,
Exactly.
this comes down to things like confidence, societal, cultural expectations around how women should act and behave still, right? We just don't have the confidence to ask for what we're worth. We have really big barriers to break there too. So, that's what we try to do here on this podcast. So yeah, what do you think of that one?
Exactly. Yeah. And honestly, that's why we probably will never live to see gender parity in our lifetime. There's far too much work to be done in that space. And at times I even think and get a little skeptical, like, why bother if I'll never see it? But then I also think, well, if we don't, it'll never move. And then what type of message is that sending? The risk of doing nothing is serious because the point of taking action today is for generations after us to reap that benefit, right? So this conversation is a part of taking action. And to your point, really important here, advocating for what you're worth. We are never taught this in school, which is crazy to think of because school is supposed to prepare you for life after school and to live life as an adult. Yet they're not teaching you such basic critical life skills like advocating for what you're worth. If you don't dictate what you're worth, you should never let anyone else dictate it for you. You should control that, right? I'm thinking we actually need to make that one full episode. There's just not enough education on that. And you do a lot of work in that space.
Yeah, I agree. Actually, perhaps we do need to do that. Let our listeners decide. Let's put a vote up on the stories. Okay, so that's interesting what you say there about why bother, right? Because that also kind of that thinking also kind of goes into things like climate change. Like, why would I bother recycling anything? Because I can't make a difference. But of course you can, right? It does feel like a task too big to tackle, and maybe that's why we do keep having to have it, because it is a big task, and I hate having to rehash things. So that's why I'm like boring. My ADHD won't handle it, right? I just want it to be resolved. So all right, so let's move on to structural inequality. So on the page, they break this down as barriers to equal pay, limited education, and underrepresentation in leadership. So we've kind of just touched on the equal pay debate there. But surely it can't be hard to pay people the same money for the same job, regardless of their gender, right? I mean, I understand that things like, years of experience may be at play or a consideration, but if you have two people with similar experience in the same job and one earns more than the other because they are male, does that even make sense to you in this day and age? It's 2025, right?
No.
We have more women striving to be in the C-suite, right? But without clear pathways created and little to no support from a family management perspective to help them be there, this is always going to be a hard road to travel, right? So we've got to make it easier. And whilst the debate around flexibility, working remotely and going back to the office is, it's quietening down a little bit, there has been a huge movement by larger companies to get people back into the office. And this is not a supportive move if you want to get more women into leadership positions, right? That's the total opposite of that. So what are your thoughts on this, Cece?
Oh, I have very strong thoughts on this, but absolutely. It sounds ridiculous that we have to say things like, it can't be hard to pay a woman and a man the same salary to perform the same job if their qualifications are similar. It's ridiculous that it's still such an issue. But when it comes to women in the C-suite, while there has been progress, and I've seen there's been a lot of progress, especially as I'm more aware of myself as a leader in the industry and I'm following this information, all the trends more closely, it still is slow.
Yeah.
In fact, according to a research by S&P, women held just 11.8% of roughly 15,000 C-suite roles that were assessed, which is actually down 12.2% from the year before. And that's the first time that we're seeing a decline since maybe around 2005-ish. And that was the year that S&P started first measuring that particular set of data. And they're suggesting that part of the decline is a waning decreased focus on diversity and inclusion efforts. And the way to accelerate growth of women into the C-suite is through mentorship and sponsorship, which are naturally part of D&I efforts. But
Right.
to add to
No,
your
makes sense.
thoughts about that big return to office, or the RTO as people are calling it, that
Mm,
will definitely have an impact on those numbers that you're seeing. I'm already seeing that come to play because a lot of the working moms that I also are on my team, they're struggling with getting their kids to school on time, but also having to be in the office and in person on time. So
mm.
yes, if the goal is to get more women in leadership positions, demanding an RTO without flexibility or no support, it just won't support that goal at all. It'll just continue to drive those statistics down. It's like forcing women to choose between having a family and pursuing their career. But why can't they have both? Because you would never ask a man that question. It never comes up.
No, yeah, no, that's totally true. And I think, obviously we were in the office pre-pandemic and now we've got a new way of life. So asking people to just come back without, setting up some kind of things around that that's going to support doing that. If that's what you're going to do, then you have to allow for people to take their kids to school, or the system has to have something in place where you can drop them off knowing that they're going to be taken care of and you can get in work on time and you can leave work on time and still pick them up and they will still be under some sort of care, and that is supported financially by the government. Rah, 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 we can keep going, right? So where is the system of support if you're going to demand that? So all
Right.
of this is going to have a massive impact on the leadership pathway and pipeline for women. So there's some really important. It's quite interesting what you said about the stats there on the C-suite roles. It sounds like we're going backwards, which is alarming.
Yeah.
We don't want that, do we? So progress
It's
isn't just
it's
slow,
slow.
it's actually going backwards.
That was one.
Okay. All right, let's talk about accountability. So again, nothing happens unless we take accountability for the change, and that involves all of us. Now, we all have to be accountable for everything that we do, right? So it's all very well to hold an event and engage in tokenism and tokenistic activities and then go back to our desk like nothing happened. But, that's not enough, right? We know that. We actually have to do something.
Right. It involves men, women, non-binary, everyone.
Yeah.
The only way I will believe that institutions support accelerating action in this space is by making it part of their budget.
Mm,
When there is no budget involved, I can't be convinced that it's a priority because it's too easy for it to be forgotten unless it was an actual line item on the budget.
mm.
That's why it's really everyone's responsibility. And to go a step above that, we have to start at the earliest levels. So really making that a focus in the school's curriculum from a very young age. We should be planting seeds into our children's minds so they can begin to think about how they will accelerate action when the time comes.
Yeah, very true. I think the education system, sorry, can play a huge role in this. And I mean, I'm not familiar with what the curriculum is in the education system anymore from an early age. I mean, I did early childhood teaching, but that was a very long time ago. So I mean, we would hope that there are some things in place. But that's a very good point there, Cece. So,
Mhm.
okay, so we've talked about the theme for International Women's Day and what it all means. We've broken down our individual thoughts on it and the impact. So, how do we go about affecting change in some practical ways? Well, here's what we suggest, right? So, consciously choose to pay people the same if they are doing the same job at the same level, regardless of gender. Now, this applies if you are the employer paying them or the manager managing them. And even if you are the employer and you are aware that this is happening, then insist that the person who's doing a similar job to you, especially if you're a man, gets paid the same. Now, I saw this actually happen in advertising once with a partner team, and the male counterpart said, "I want you to pay my partner the same as me." So that was
Oh,
great to actually
brilliant.
see that in action, right? So we have to fight for this right for everybody.
Right.
If you are a male listener and you know you earn more than then you have to kind of speak up for them, right? So you've got to make your employer accountable for this, because the more you ask, the more you're going to advocate for this change, right? The more likely it's going to happen.
Right.
And
Right.
encourage your female employees and your female friends and your female counterparts to go for leadership roles and support them to get there with education, right? Give them the chance and help them build their confidence through training, coaching, and mentoring. Any of the skills they need. Encourage them to do it. If they've got the ability, then the thing that's probably holding them back is any sort of societal, cultural kind of conditioning and a lack of confidence. So those things can be overcome.
Exactly.
So we can do that through education, training, coaching, and mentoring.
Exactly. And to add one more to that trifecta, sponsorship is key, especially if you are a man. Consider how you can either sponsor a female colleague or connect that colleague to someone who can sponsor them. If you're a female, one of our female listeners, identify potential sponsors and create a plan to connect with them and learn from them, and then pay it forward by doing the same. And that is a process that will reap continuous dividends.
Oh, 100%. Always be of value to the people around you. It really does pay back. So,
Yes.
whatever you think about International Women's Day, our hope is that you can take away these insights from this episode. Now, International Women's Day isn't about tokenism, it's about action. What can you do today to move us one step further along in this debate? And be an advocate for your female and underrepresented counterparts by actively looking to include them and be conscious of cultural differences and needs.
And actively seek out a sponsor who will help position you for that next leadership role, because we need more women leaders, as you heard from our data.
Amen to that.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Leading Ladies Who Lunch podcast. If we can leave you with a thought, as you think about International Women's Day and what it means to you, what is one thing you plan to do to accelerate action in your workplace? If you like this episode, we would be so grateful if you can share it with your friends and tag us on social media at Leading Ladies Who Lunch. Your reviews of this podcast mean so much to us. We'd love it if you can rate it and subscribe to the show.
Remember, you can find us and subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and other podcast platforms. So subscribe to stay up to date with the latest episodes and follow us on Instagram at Leading Ladies Who Lunch.
Stay tuned for another great episode in 2 weeks.
Until then, stay sassy. Thank you for joining us on the empowering journey at the Leading Ladies Who Lunch podcast. We hope you've enjoyed our insightful discussions, actionable strategies, and inspiring stories that we break down during each episode. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to Leading Ladies Who Lunch on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. And remember, the conversations you've heard on this podcast are just the beginning of your journey. Let your voice be heard, inspire change, and continue breaking barriers as you lead with authenticity, resilience, and unwavering determination.
Until next time, keep embracing your leadership potential, challenging the norms, and shaping a better world for women in the workplace. Leading Ladies Who Lunch, empowering women, changing lives.